I think we as car lovers imagine hot hatches as all being little turbo monsters with great all-wheel drive systems, and the truth is, there's not many of those left anymore.
Well, good news everyone, Mazda has decided to add a turbo to the Mazda 3. It is here and it's got all-wheel drive. However, they have made it explicitly clear that Mazda Speed as a brand is officially dead.
The all-wheel drive turbo hatchback is so rare, in fact, that in order to find a decent competitor, we went and got a used GolfR to talk about how well did Mazda do.
You're watching Everyday Driver. We make a TV show, podcast,
and YouTube channels dedicated to great cars, driving adventures, and helping you find a car you'll love.
subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss a thing.
The Volkswagen Mark 7 Golf R is the right competitor, slightly used. The 8th generation Golf R is going to be very powerful and very fast and more luxurious and be even nicer and more expensive. But a slightly used Mark 7 Golf R, that's the sweet spot.
They actually made the Golf R from 2015 to 2019. They did not even bother to make a 2020 model, and that's because this is the end of the 7th generation of the Volkswagen Golf.
This particular car is privately owned, and the owner paid $29,000 for 19,000 miles on a car that looks brand new. And the dynamics are still very, very good.
This 7th generation Golf is my favorite looking model since the very first one.
It's kind of looked this way for about 3 or 4 generations now, and all Volkswagen is doing is playing with fussy lines and doing little things to change it. It's the trim, it's the more aggressive intakes, it's the pipes out back, it's the subtle things that differentiate it to be the performance version.
Some slight variation of the same interior is in all of their product. Luckily, everything's ergonomic, the seats are solid. This is a nice, well thought out place to be. It's just not fun.
There's nothing that stands out to me as really interesting, but the good thing is it's going to be clean and classy and still very nice for a long time.
This Mazda 3 is fantastic looking, and in this great red paint that Mazda actually charges you extra for, and they should, it is a fantastic looking color.
Mazda is designing their cars with surface in mind. They're being very deliberate about the lines, how they carry through, and the relationship to surfaces, but more importantly, the shut lines, how panels and parts go together. It's very subtle, and as a matter of fact, it won the 2020 World Car Design Award.
The interior is just a nice place to be. There's nothing profound here. It's actually surprisingly simple, and that makes it elegant. The gauges are a combination of actual needles and digital displays. It's very informative. You can change the info that it's showing you on either side of the central gauge and the central gauge itself. The key button in this car is right down here next to the gear shift. That is the sport button. One click up gets you into sport. That actually does change the settings of not only the throttle response, but a little bit of the steering now as well.
The driving position is very well thought through. I just wish that power controls were on both seats, but it's only on the driver's seat. Everything, when you sit here, is just clean and clear and intuitive and easy to use and very easy to understand, but it's not boring.
Everyday Driver is brought to you by Covercraft. Use the code EVERYDAY for 10% off your order.
Mazda has been very clear about the power output of this car, and if there were ever a case to be made for buying more expensive gasoline, it's this car. With 87 octane, Mazda says this car makes 227 horsepower and 310 pound-feet of torque, which is respectable. But with 93 octane, this car now makes 250 horsepower and 320 pound-feet of torque.
This uses a 2.5-liter Sky-Active Mazda engine that has been in a lot of their product. And now this turbo version, that actually is in many of their lineup that have a turbo 2.5-liter, including their big 7-seater Mazda CX-9.
And now with a dynamic pressure turbo, they're changing the way the air flows into the turbo itself. There will always be a channel of air going in, but now there's a flappy valve that now controls how much air, depending on your throttle position, to make it more focused. At low RPM, you've just got thrust. All that torque really means it's got that V6 kind of feel, which is something Mazda wanted to do. Mazda is going after a different audience, a more mature and upscale audience that might not hoon. This is no longer full hoon, this is mini hoon or luxury hoon. It's not the full Mazda speed kind of experience.
This is a 6-speed automatic with paddles, so it isn't a dual clutch like the GolfR has. But that means that when you do the normal automatic transmission, walk through traffic stuff, it feels perfectly great and fades into the background. But when you want to drive it quickly, you put it over into manual, you pull a paddle, and you know what? It listens.
If you've been following what Mazda's doing, they are studying human biomechanics as a way to provide a natural feel and interaction to their cars. And for a while I thought it was more of a marketing exercise than anything else. I'm completely wrong. Mazda wants a consistent feel from start to finish to the end of life of their cars. And what they're thinking about and engineering into their cars is the way you roll onto the throttle, the power that should be available depending on what you're doing with the car, or the braking power that is available at that point in time. So it's a consistent but natural feel. It's what you expect when you roll onto the throttle.
It's actually a little bit of a challenge to seek out and find a GolfR that has not been tuned in one way or another. The owner put a different exhaust and intake on it, not to try to have it do anything other than sound differently, and it sounds pretty cool.
Now the power in the GolfR is 292 horsepower, 280 pound-feet of torque, which is a lot, and it puts it down. You can feel it. This is a different car than the GTI. You might say, what's really the difference? Is it weight? Is it just a little bit more power? Why is it so much more expensive? Volkswagen put the 2-liter engine in this car under a motorsports development program that included the cylinder head and the pistons. It included a lot of things that you would hot rod in an engine. The GolfR makes most of its power up at the top end, which is kind of what you expect from a turbocharged car. And there is the lag thing, but I actually kind of like the thrust. I like anticipating it in this car. There's so much refinement going on in this car that I've always thought it was just sort of the sluggish last place car among all the hot hatches.
Now that DSG you can't argue with. That is instantaneous shifts on this car that really do feel a whole class above what's possible with that automatic transmission from Mazda. How often is the average person going to need that or care? Hard to say, but there's definitely a better gearbox here.
I love dual clutches of all kinds, and PDK is the top for me, of course, but this one is so good. It's amazing how transmission transforms the car, and this is still only a 6-speed DSG. It seems like an antique in the world of cars at this point, but it's still very, very good.
There's a conservative tuning going on at Volkswagen that has kept their cars from having an unexpected fun factor, and that's true here in the GolfR. Now I know some of you are screaming at the screen and saying, if you only had a GolfR that had fill in the tune, fill in the part, it would be fun. But I come back to, Volkswagen didn't provide it that way, and that's disappointing.
Everyday Driver is brought to you by Griot's Garage.
In the prior generations of the Mazda 3, Mazda had an independent rear suspension, and they typically had one of the best handling cars in this segment. But with this generation, Mazda removed the independent rear suspension and they went with a torsion beam rear axle, a solid rear axle.
You would think that the solid rear axle, this torsion beam back there, would be now an Achilles heel. It only really reveals itself on tight, twisty roads like this one. The rest of the time, you're gonna be surprised how good this car rides. It feels very compliant and feels well suited for most situations.
Because of the all-wheel drive system, they've done a little bit of magic. This version has more of their GVC Plus, which is an elaborate way for them to say that they are helping you in the corner.
When you come into a corner and you let off just a little bit and start to turn in, the car reduces the torque just slightly. Usually you think, I can feel that, but I guarantee you're not. It's subtle.
The Mazda all-wheel drive system anticipates so well that I am shocked to discover this car has steer by throttle. I can put it in, it carves, now I can hit the gas halfway through, and it tightens that line because of the rear wheel drive that kicks in. Now it can't do torque vectoring or anything crazy like that, but it is ahead of what you need in a way that the GolfR isn't. The result is I find myself enjoying that rear wheel drive additive to help me rocket myself through corners and to give me confidence. When I'm halfway through a corner and I'm not sure if it's gonna work, you start easing your way into the throttle and the car just hunkers and blasts out.
We've been in some cars in the past that has a sport button that we can't figure out what it does. That's not the case anymore with the sport button in this car. No longer is it just throttle response. As a matter of fact, now it changes the steering feel.
Unfortunately, the torsion beam does create bounce mid-corner. If you hit a weird imperfection or some sort of bump in the middle of a corner, a good independent rear suspension will absorb that, soak it up, and keep you on your line.
This car is hard to shake loose. Even on these tires. Tires are very much part of the ride equation here. They're very carefully selected for the balance. But performance tires on this car would change the character dramatically.
If you're missing the old Mazda speed, this gets close. Sadly, you don't have a manual transmission here, and if you enjoyed the wild, crazy, hair-on-fire feel of the last Mazda Speed 3 because of torque steer, well, that's gone. But in its place, you have fantastic rotation available because the rear wheels are involved. The rear half of the car is helping with rotation and turning this into truly a hot hatch. There are key things in this GolfR that are fundamentally better than that Mazda 3. First off, it has an independent rear suspension, and you can tell on a back road like this that has surprise bumps in the middle of a corner, this car just soaks it up. And in general, this feels stiffer than the Mazda 3. That is a softer, more commuter-focused car. The GolfR definitely has a stiffer suspension feel. While this GolfR isn't really a standout in steering feel, it definitely is better than what's in the Mazda 3. It has a more mechanical feel, and it feels like I've got linkage to the tires, whereas the Mazda 3 is just an electric steering rack, and it does a good job.
The GolfR also has a 4-inch shorter wheelbase than the Mazda, and you can absolutely feel it when it rotates. The Mazda 3 is absolutely let down by the lack of good tires. This car is wearing the Michelin PS4s, which transform the handling.
Anytime I've driven the GolfR, this all-wheel drive system is not ready when I need it. It's a stutter step behind. It slips, then grips, and as a result, I'm waiting for it to deliver the help that I'm hoping for. The Mazda's instantaneous. This actually has a beat before you feel the back half does anything. In fact, most of the time, it just feels like a front-wheel drive GTI.
The crazy thing is, Todd and I can chase each other on this road, and in either car, we're right there with each other. There's no difference in terms of one pulling away in the other car, and you think, clearly that car is just better at everything. It's such an interesting comparison because it comes down to what you want out of the car. Are you going to do more commuting and a little bit of sporty driving? The Mazda 3 is for you. If you want to really get after a canyon road, of course, the GolfR is the better car. Yeah, that transmission right there in the downshift. It's so much smoother. The interaction's so much smoother in this car. I like this car enough to own one. It's such an excellent all-arounder. It's compact, it's comfortable, luxurious, it's the right price. I have to keep reminding myself, though, this is not going to be the most performance, the hottest model ever. So with that in mind, did Mazda hit their goal? By adding power, has it become a better car? Well, resoundingly yes. And I like that Mazda isn't just screwing a turbo to the car and calling it good.
I've driven the current Mazda 3 in almost every form, and I have to say, I didn't think that chassis could be elevated to a place where it felt like a performance car. It's a very solid commuter. It's a really nice execution of Mazda design language. It doesn't feel like a car for drivers until you add all-wheel drive and turbo, and it becomes pretty close to what you're probably hoping for from a Mazda Speed 3.
This is a hard choice because it really depends on the day and it depends on what you're looking for out of your car. The luxury level, that feeling, is equal between both cars, but I think the Mazda is better for that. If you're going to do track driving and if you're going to do any canyon driving or attack roads like this one, the GolfR wins.
An all-wheel drive, turbo, 4-cylinder hot hatch is a rare breed now, and I'm thrilled that Volkswagen keeps giving them to us. Maybe with the 8th generation GolfR and a drift mode, we will wind up with a Volkswagen product that from the factory has all the fun it could. I'm surprised with the realization these are actually uncommon cars now. 4-cylinder turbo, all-wheel drive hatchbacks is a small list, and now Mazda's on it.
I feel like Mazda is creating their own category. I actually feel like this is somewhere between the GTI and the GolfR. It's sort of GTI towards price, but it's more GolfR in terms of amenities and luxury.
Sure.
But here I am choosing the GolfR by the tiniest of amounts because it's the enthusiast choice.
Of course you picked the Golf, because of course I picked the Mazda. And we don't even plan this, I swear to you. The thing about it is, every time I drive the GolfR, I'm impressed, but I'm not in love. Now, I know, I hear the
Them are
typing.
fighting words.
I hear the typing. Many of you are out there going, yeah, but if you tune it with the, I already talked about that. I know there's the tune. I'm talking about from the factory. I like the Mazda better, and I'm surprised to say that, but the thing that pushes me right over the edge is the rotation under power.
Look, today is everybody gets a gold star today. Everybody graduates from the 4th grade to the 5th grade and you get a gold star. That's great. But it really does depend on what you're using the car for. And I love the Mazda. I love what they're doing. They are pushing. We've said for years we need more power. Here it is.
Yeah.
But you can't ignore a used GolfR for the same money.
I agree with that.
I think it's interesting. And you know, if you're doing track days and enthusiast driving, get the GolfR. If you're commuting and doing luxury kind of driving, I don't know what luxury driving is, but if you're doing that, choose the Mazda 3.
But it doesn't fall apart on a back road. That's one of the things I like.
No, it doesn't.
We were able to go every bit as fast in the Mazda as we were in the GolfR, and I didn't expect that, and that left me even more surprised. Everybody gets a gold star. It's ridiculous. I can't believe it. But of course, we didn't pick the same car because that's very much who we are. But we've wound up with two great all-wheel drive hatchbacks in a market that needs more.
I love this car. I like it a lot. It's fun to just hustle, but more importantly, when you're hustling, it's comfortable.
With this turbo, Mazda's done a surprisingly good job, a shockingly good job, of taking what felt like an average commuter car that was very nice to be in and turning into something with an enthusiast flair.
All right, if I'm gonna choose, I am slightly ahead in the GolfR. This is the car that makes me more excited on a road like this.
Occasionally, the back end is involved, but generally, this feels like a well set up GTI, and I have trouble with it not feeling like much more than that.